So while we are waiting, maybe just a few minutes, we could start already with a short question, with a short poll. So I would like to ask all of you to look at this question here. What are the main barriers for women's adaptation of sustainable land management? So you have two options to actually answer. You can either just take a picture of the QR code on the top right, or you just type in your mobile or laptop, whatever you have, slido.com, and there you can add the hashtag COP, and you will find the possible answers. It does not work? Slido.com. Yes, there it is. So it seems to work. There are the first questions coming. So you will not be able to answer all the questions. Only 3 answers are possible in maximum. I think we have to start because instead of getting more and more, we are getting less. So, while you are still answering the questions, maybe very briefly, I'm Tatenda Lehmann from the University of Bern, Switzerland, from the Center for Environment, from the CD, and I'm working for WOCAT. And maybe you're asking yourself, why is a man standing here opening this session, this gender session? Actually, I'm the quote man of WOCAT here in the delegation, and that's why I have the honor to say something as well. But immediately, I would like to hand over to Nicole Harari, working together with me at the University of Bern, and she's in the WOCAT executive team, and she's the heart a bit of this new gender tool of WOCAT. And maybe you can just start with these responses we got from our participants. Thanks.
Thank you, Tatenda. Some more people are joining us. That's great. Welcome. So the question is how many people have actually answered, or whether it was mainly Lorena's. Let's see. If it was only you, then we have on first place is finances. Second one is land use rights, and I think we have been speaking about that and the tenure topic quite extensively over the past week. Cultural norms and taboos. Knowledge and expertise seems less of an issue. And labor needs, nobody has answered that. So that is interesting. So let's dive into the session. And I see also we have gender experts here. That is exciting. So as we are a small round, let's just keep it informal. So also if you have a question while we are presenting, please just feel free to raise your hand so we can really keep it a bit informal and have a discussion. So I will be talking about the gender tool we have been developing with the Unccd Secretariat over the past year, And just as a basis, some background information. So WOCAT was in 2014 selected as the primary recommended database by the convention. That is where the knowledge on best practices is included. It's a voluntary reporting of the best practices, so of course not all countries are using it, but the number is growing. And then in 2019 there was another COP decision where WOCAT was mentioned and its support in promoting the analysis, dissemination and accessibility of sustainable land management best practices. And then in 2020 a partnership agreement was signed with the convention to boost the uptake of sustainable practices around the world. Next slide. So when we were looking together with the colleagues from Unccd into the database, we noted that yes, we do have some questions about women and men participation in sustainable land management, but this is not enough if we want to understand how we can further support women in adopting sustainable land management. Next click, merci. So you see here we first of all did some analysis of the existing data. There are over 2,000 good sustainable land management practices in the database. And we can see here people are reporting in gray whether women and men are involved, whether only women are involved, in orange or only men. And we can see some diversity between different technology groups. We can see women were mentioned under improved ground and vegetation cover, under integrated soil fertility management, rotational systems, home gardens, and then if you look, for instance, here under water diversion and drainage, which is rather labor intense, we had mainly a lot of examples, so over 80 examples there where it's only men involvement, around 50 with women and men involvement, and only few examples with with women involvement. So it really depends a bit on the type of technology, whether both women and men are involved or only men or only women. But that we said that was very broad, that was not enough, of course, to understand what's actually happening on the ground. And that's then when we came up with a project. That's the next slide. Not yet. That's when we came up with the project, which I will introduce in a moment here. I think you can hardly read it. These are concrete examples from the WOCAT database which exist, where women are involved. So you can see here from Bangladesh, there is the keyhole garden. That's a garden that is built in areas that are being flooded, and the approach to disseminate that technology between women is a peer-to-peer pass-on approach, where women teach women how to create such gardens. We have a multi-grain nutrient ball from India, where women create these balls, and it's mainly focusing on nutrition and the nutritional value also for the family. Then we have examples from Afghanistan of rehabilitation of degraded pastures, where also women are involved. Or we have other example of an irrigation pump from Uganda, which was also established and is supporting female farmers. So this is just to show you the diversity of the different examples that are already in the database. If you query women, you will find these results. And then when we looked at the literature, and I think if you are a gender expert, you are well aware of these publications, but just to highlight again the importance of gender and gender equality for sustainable land management, adoption, spread, and upscaling. And then the fact that technologies are really not gender neutral, that is always important to highlight. They respond to policies, institutions, and social values. And then very often we can see that technologies are not designed according to needs and conditions of gender, so technologies are gender biased. you can click on the next button. So our aim in WOCAT was to enhance our activities with regards to gender, and you can see WOCAT works around 4 pillars. And the first and foremost is the database, so to create additional data, additional knowledge on gender-responsive sustainable land management, but then also the other elements to build capacities in this regard, and we will continue that with Unccd in the coming year, and then have more tools and methods available. So the questionnaire, which I will present, is part of that. And then also bring people together, and we had, Fida, you were talking today about the WeCan network, so also to work with WOCAT consortium partners like FAO to bring together networks of women to share their good practices. So that's there as well. Yes, so here now comes the tool which I will be introducing and which it would be nice to discuss with you and also get your feedback on that. So the tool is helping to add a gender lens to sustainable land management technologies and approaches, and first and foremost assess their gender responsiveness. Then it helps to assess how the technologies can further be improved in order to step up adoption and dissemination. So the first one is really to look at the state, what is it now, what does it offer now to women, and the second one is to see how the technology itself can further be enhanced and improved, and with that to have the necessary information to support planners, designers and implementers to identify the right women-friendly technologies in their projects and programs in order to bring gender-responsive sustainable land management to scale. The next slide, please. So a bit of information how this came together. So we have co-developed this questionnaire with many colleagues and institutions that were involved. And we had a review process with experts and were testing it in 15 countries. And that led us to the finalization of the tool. And we have developed some publications, and we will share that with you also later. Here are all the institutions that were involved, both in the co-development of the tool, but also in its testing. Good. So now looking at the questionnaire a bit, you can see it has 2 parts. The part 1 is a guide, so we also discussed quite a lot in the review with the experts the need to really guide people to use this tool. We cannot expect from sustainable land management experts that they are well trained on gender, so we also need to provide enough guidance at the beginning to really explain to people how they should carry out this, or how they should apply this tool and carry it out. And you can see the guide focuses on 3 elements and how to gather the information. So on one hand, on external sources, so that is national data sets, reports, etc. that are available. Then a number of key informant interviews, and the third and most important is the discussion group with female and male land users, and depending on the cultural context, to have this discussion group either with male and female separately or with male and female mixed. So depending on what the people who are going to discuss with the farmers are assessing, what they believe, how they can best have female and male voices heard, the discussion group is split or not. And then the questionnaire is looking at 5 chapters: an introduction to the technology and approach, information about the people who are discussing the technology and approach. And then the most important is to understand the context of the community where the technology is applied. Then the related activities, so establishment and maintenance activities, the impacts on women and men the technology has, and eventually, as I said before, a number of recommendations by the land users, by female and male land users on how to further improve the gender responsiveness of the technology. So I will run quickly a bit through the questionnaire with the hope that looking at it, you would also have some feedback. We would really be grateful if you see also elements that you think are missing. That would be exciting to hear. So about the context here of the community where the technology is applied, so we are looking at the main characteristics of the community itself. You can click one more. So we look at stability, we look at level of wealth of the community, at the socio-cultural context, and the services available at reasonable distance. So these are some examples. You can click one more. And then we look at, we have heard that a lot these days about, we look at access to land, we look at level of mechanization for productive activities, we look at the market orientation, off-farm income, level of education, and you can see always with the aim to understand, is it mostly women, mostly men, only women, only men, or both? So really to make this differentiation. Then we look at gender roles in household control and decision making. So we look at different elements here. We look at decision making on health, nutrition, education of children, household budget from on-farm income, from off-farm income. We look at who is taking decisions on natural resources, on the use of land, who is selecting which technology is applied. Is it the man? Is it the woman? Are they both deciding when they implement the technology? Who is purchasing agricultural inputs? Who is responsible for livestock? And then there is many more other elements. And then we look at gender roles in land management. So who is involved in cash crop production? Is it, in most cases, very often mainly men? Who is involved in food crop production? Who is involved in animal husbandry? Who is processing the products? And who is actually marketing them? And very often, in many contexts, we do have this division that the male are responsible for the cash crop production, whereas female are responsible in the processing, and then again we have rather the men responsible for the marketing of the produce, and therefore again gaining ownership over the actual financial resources generated with marketing the product. Then what we also found very important and included here is the specific plants, crops, or animals which are under the responsibility of either women or men in the household. So really to specify whether women, for instance, are responsible for bees, whether women are responsible for the specific crops, for vegetables, and to explain also why they are responsible for this, for the crop, for the animal, or for another product type. Then we come to a section on access and control over services. So really to get a grasp whether women and men have different access to mobility, to means of transportation. That's very important then for the marketing of the product, for whether they have access to employment, informal or informal, and social or informal organizations, community groups, which of course are essential also for a joint marketing of a product. And then we move to the ownership of land and livestock, land and water use rights in the community. So we look at whether the access to land is inherited, is it bought, opened or cleared, whether it's authorized by the community or another situation, We look at the quality of land. We all know that very often the rather degraded land is where the women are responsible for, and the more fertile it becomes, the more interested are the men in the actual land. So also here to understand what's the current situation. Are women more on the marginal lands, degraded land, or is it shared? So, and then the type of tenure rights as well. Then we look at the inheritance. Do women and men inherit land equally? Yes or not? And we look at the land use rights. Are they based on statutory or customary practices? And that's a whole section going into quite a lot of details about the tenure elements. Then we look at access and control to main inputs needed for establishment and maintenance. So here it's the type of different inputs. The technologies vary greatly. So people tell, for instance, okay, we need 3 seedlings from the nursery, and then we look at whether men and women have access and or control or both over it. And then eventually is the question of involvement and participation. So we look at the different phases of initiation, planning, implementation, and monitoring of a project, and again, whether women and men are both involved. And I have said it in the caucus this morning, we can often see that in the initiation and planning, women are excluded. And then when we come to implementation, it's about having a lot of women beneficiaries, so there we count a lot of women, but then when it comes to the actual monitoring, women are again excluded from this process of monitoring and the implementation itself. Then comes another quite long section on the impact, where we had a lot of discussions what to look at, and the idea here is that in the focus group discussion, people tell whether the technology had a positive or negative impact on a lot of different elements, so in shift in labor patterns, in income patterns, in the difficulty of activities, where the activities become more, where they becoming more easy with the technology implementation. We are looking at the impacts on production and processing costs, access to market income, control over income, so a long list of impacts, and to see who has been benefiting, women and men, and how much. Then another key element is the enabling environment or the hindering conditions for implementation. So we look at current policies, laws in place, we look at knowledge and technical skills, and we look at access to inputs and skills to use such. And you can see here always these little icons on the side. So we do, this gives guidance to the user, whether you are supposed to answer these questions only through the group discussion, or whether you are also supposed to do key informant interviews, so you can combine the information. So you have both inputs from a key informant, for instance, about policies and laws, which is something that might be difficult to get through the group discussion. Then comes an interesting and last chapter, which is about the recommendations on how to improve gender responsiveness. So here we ask the people in the group discussion, what would they actually adjust? How would they adapt the technology to increase adoption? So this is a discussion with suggestions by the land users, by the farmers. And then there is a question how the questionnaire helps, and this group discussion helped to reflect on the gender responsiveness. So here it's really to get some answers from the ground, from the people that have been participating, and their suggestions how gender responsiveness can be improved. And then we look, in the group discussion, we look at 2 elements. So first we look at technology-related factors. So we look at the participation in technology design and what are suggestions by the farmers to enhance the design process. We look at the amount of time that is needed for the technology, the amount of work, how can this be improved, how labor division and efficiency can be improved, how the timing of tasks could be improved, or also affordability and competition with other expenses. And then after the technological aspects, we look at the approach, so the enabling environment, and is there suggestions from the farmers in whether laws have to be adjusted, knowledge of legal rights is not available, access to land, how can it be improved, access to water, the opportunity to have legitimate tenure rights recognized and registered, or is there suggestion on how to improve education and literacy level? So this is really from the ground advice or suggestions that then can go into and support project design and planning. Yes, with that I have finished a round of introducing the questionnaire. It is longer than that. I have chosen some key sections which we thought to highlight here. As we said, we did that with the Unccd Secretariat, the testing, and we gathered data in 14 or 15 countries, and here are some key messages that result from this data collection. So increasing awareness is required about women's roles both in food production and land management. Gender-blind technology design and dissemination reduces the potential impact for adoption and may even reinforce existing prejudice and inequalities. Gender-related issues in sustainable land management should always be assessed in context-specific as well as general ways and acted upon accordingly. And women need to be given access to the same levels of information and particularly also extension services as men. So this is just a selection of 4 of around 10 key messages that result from applying this tool in 14 or 15 countries. And you can see here, and we can distribute that, we have some group profiles created with some key messages and concrete examples from countries. So you can see we have a technology profile on soil and vegetation. It's about improving soil fertility management and ground cover. We have a technology profile on agroforestry and home gardens, about mixed production systems for improved livelihoods. Another on water and irrigation, so water harvesting and efficient use and protection of water resources. One on feed and fodder for livestock, and another one on semi-natural and natural forests as hotspots of biodiversity for humans and nature. So these were these 5 categories or technology groups where we had seen often the involvement of women is mentioned, and therefore we had focused on these 5 and run this questionnaire in these 15 countries to get some data back, which is presented in these short profiles. Here you can see the profiles, so that's how it looks like at the end with some policy recommendations and the data presented, but you cannot read it as it's too small. And then the next click. So there is the overall profile, and then you have here these concrete examples. This one from Cambodia, you can see where it is, what was done, and you can see there in pink and blue the impacts on women and men. With that, I finish with a quote from Bangladesh, which I really liked. Our colleague from FAO was implementing an assisted natural regeneration project for quite some time, and he applied the gender tool. And what he came back with is, he said, women stated that it was eye-opening for them to realize that they can also participate in the sustainable land management technologies implementation. So they realized that they can actually also do assisted natural regeneration, and not only men, and that not all technologies require special technical knowledge that women cannot afford. And he was also saying that they feel that they need to create social awareness, to break the concept of taboos, to not involve women in work outside the house. So that was what they reported back as an insight from the testing of the tool in Bangladesh. Then we have our colleague from Colombia. She has also tested the tool in a conservation project. It's an NGO in Colombia. And I don't know if it works, Tatenda. We could listen to what she has to say. And maybe I can put the mic. Is there somebody?
Questionnaire on gender responsiveness of SLM technologies for the technology sustainable traditional native beekeeping in the Vereda Los Chochos municipality of Trinidad, Casanare, Colombia, with a discussion group of mainly women and some men. Participants were very happy to meet after lockdown, and through the discussion, they recognized the advantages of the technology to improve women's participation in the project and on its benefits. The contribution of this tool for our projects is that the discussions explicitly touch gender issues, and the idea of transversalizing this topic in conservation projects is very important for us. So this tool provides us with ideas on how to actually discuss it with our stakeholders.
So that was an insight from Colombia. And we thought to share some other insights here. It's from Haiti, where they implemented the terra preta technique of harvesting water in home gardens. And our colleague from the Red Cross reported that this questionnaire helps to reflect on the gender approach in the communities and to see the strengths and weaknesses of the terra preta technique in relation to gender. And then one of the participants was saying, if something is going to be done, I would not want it to break the hierarchy that exists in the household, not to serve as a bad example for children. So also that it helped to understand what are the hierarchy and that the project not necessarily with its intervention should come and break those hierarchies. Das ist fest. Now you can stop. And with that, I would hand over to Amadou. And he will, from Centre Suivi Écologique in Senegal, where they have been testing the tool, and he will share some insights with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nicole. Senegal is one of the 15 countries involved in this experience. And we have tested this experience in the western part of Senegal, in the Thiès region. Next slide, please. And this technology was applied to the technology of natural assisted regeneration and reforestation of rognier palm or palm tree. And I want just to say that in these communities, people have a strong and huge background experience in agroforestry. And agroforestry can enhance the soil fertility and also provide more income for some projects using from palm tree. And as you know, women, it is a good opportunity for women to enhance their livelihoods. Next, please. And before to comment this slide, allow me just to say that unfortunately in this area, regarding to climate change, population growth, unfortunately there's a resource, there's palm tree, are threatened by this, as I said, climate change and population growth. And to test the tools, the gender responsive, how I said it, LSM tool, we have two groups. Why we separate groups? Because we want to make sure that we have a bottom approach, and we make sure that we have full participation of women. That's why we split. We have two groups, women and men, in order to allow women to express themselves, their idea, their needs. Next, please. And this, there is a focus group I organized this year in Senegal with my colleagues Mariam Diallo and Ahmed. Here, I want just to share 5 key lessons learned in this initiative, 5 key lessons. First of all, the adoption of the technology of combining palm tree in the cultivation area is something very hard for women, because it needs it needs labor needs, and also that's why only mainly men are adopted this technology. It is a barrier we have. And second, the palm tree are planted in fields that belong men, but the women have only a right of use. It is a second lesson learned. And the third lesson is that the third lesson is the implementation of the technology is not easy for the women. Even women, as I said earlier, can use the product to enhance their income and to fit their domestic needs. Next slide, please. Could you get back to the previous slide? Yeah. And as you see that this technology can provide more income to the women than the men, because as you said in this picture, women can diversify their activities from the leaf from the trees. They can they can produce brooms, as you know, brooms. They can produce baskets. They can produce table, and so on. Next, please. The fourth barrier constraint we can have is land tenure, because the former law didn't authorize equitable access to land. And last but not least, if you need to improve the adoption of this technology, this tool, what we suggest is to enhance the capacities of the women in terms of financial, in terms of organization, in order to allow them to better adopt this technology. These are the few points I want just to share with you during our experience in Senegal of testing this, the gender, what we call the gender responsive land sustainable management tool. Thank you very much. Malheureusement, la présentation n'est pas en français. On a improvisé. Alors, vous m'excuserez un peu de ne pas pouvoir peut-être m'exprimer comme je le souhaitais en français. Merci beaucoup. Thanks a lot.
Merci beaucoup, c'était très clair. Merci beaucoup. So we thought to have a short round before we move to Karen. Some feedback from our panelists we will have in the second part of this session. So maybe I start with Stephanie. Jacques from CIAT, she will tell us a few words what she thinks about the usefulness of the tool in general, or also some insights on improvement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Thank you for the presentation and also for the insights from Senegal. This tool is extremely useful, first of all, because we need to have gender-responsive tools. Most of our projects need to address the women, need to address the challenge they face, and in that matter, this tool will be very useful. Probably one of the points, because the questionnaire is very complex, but probably one of the points that is always interesting to take into account, it is this cash crop versus subsistence crop, because we know that for subsistence agriculture, women are more involved, and as soon as it's reached cash crops, then the men tend to be involved. And it's very important to raise awareness on that and to bring also insight, but this might be also something that is also very difficult to address in the sense that if we're already in the cash crop, might be less women involved in the agriculture, so how do we bridge this gap? Another point, it's a very important tool for its outcome, because when we need to scale up the adaptation of practice, we need to build on what works and what doesn't work, and also for women involvement. And as mentioned at the beginning, finance is a barrier. And having the opportunity to prove what works and what is gender sensitive will also help to include finance and to include financial tools that can address women there, because we know what is sensitive, and we know also how to integrate these opportunities. We are working as CIAT a lot in investment and in agri-business opportunities and in the integration of adaptation practice in new agribusiness as a tool to face to climate change. So this tool would be definitely a very good way to integrate that and to have not only climate responsive business, but also gender responsive business. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephanie. And we will hear a bit later about some experiences in investment and women in agribusiness. So bear with us. And now I move to Natalie. Would you like to give us some feedback? Yes. A few words about how this could be useful for the CSO context.
Okay, thank you for encouraging me. We were. I think I don't remember what we were called. A kind of experts. Oh, experts. Last summer, and it was very nice to be so much. They
told us you shouldn't use this one.
I shouldn't.
You should.
Sorry. And it was a very nice experience to be in this group. Without telling too much already about my presentation, we really welcome this tool, and we think it is very nice to have this tool to get more insight, to also help to prepare the Unccd with their to implement their gender action plan, and I will come back later with more thoughts and insights. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else with some feedback? Yes, great.
Don't worry, I can speak here.
Ah, Okay, first you and then
Okay.
the lady.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Kone. I'm among, young structures here in Côte d'Ivoire, and I'm young. I want to talk about young people here in Côte d'Ivoire. We young, and we also need technology, to develop here in Côte d'Ivoire. But the problem is that we don't have average, to be in some schools, to be even in internet, to go search or to be formed in it. But we just need, aid from the different organizations just to come with schools in order to be forming in technology. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that is, you say youth, so that you mean both women and men need better education here.
Yeah, I know, but I'm talking about young too.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good morning. I'm Marie-Hortense Gay from FAO. I'm the gender focal point of FAO Côte d'Ivoire. I would like to know if this questionnaire can be used for our project addressing in the Peace Building Fund, addressing land tenure and so on. Is it possible for us to use this questionnaire to our different projects we have on the field? Thank you.
Yes, that is definitely a yes. So the tool is already available, the questionnaire, you can use it. We have actually tested it with several FAO offices already. So they were the colleague that I had shown from Bangladesh, then was the FAO office in Sri Lanka with the gender focal point, they had tested it, and some others. So yes, definitely you can use it. As a next phase, we intend to put this also, to add this to the WOCAT database. So when you then use it and you document it, hopefully at the next COP, we will have 30, 40, 50 sustainable, gender-responsive sustainable land management technologies added to the database and made it also available to the parties. So maybe if you wait for a few more months, we will actually have it online, and so all the things you have documented, you can share them also with, within your country, within FAO, but also globally through the database. Any other feedback or questions, Fida? You can use that, yes.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. I have just one question here, because I worked also on fine? I worked on WOCAT tool as well. So we know that the most challenge for the parties to involve in this platform is the incentives to fill and to provide the information. So maybe it will be the next panel to discuss how we can activate this and engage with the CSOs, with the parties to fill and to provide this information, because they take it by default. It's part of the communities and part of the full questionnaire. So maybe we could think of how to make it also easy to access, because now we are in a life like, okay, we can use the app and quickly fill the information. So working on the gender responsive tool needs also to be attractive to the parties, to the CSOs, to even because this should feed into praise at the end, for example. Huh? So I still, this part, maybe we need to understand it more. Maybe in the next session, the next panel will discuss this more, I don't know. But that will be a key entry point to put on table that women have the role, have the solutions, and just give them the floor to disseminate their knowledge.
Thank you, Fida. Yeah, I think, that's definitely something to be discussed with Unccd, how this eventually in that part on the best practices, whether we would not also want to have the the gender more highlighted, and not only best practices, but really gender responsive best practices. So I think that's something to be discussed. And on the technology, I'm fully agreeing with you. I hope this year we can move towards having all of this on an app, so people can go out with a tablet or their smartphone to collect the data, to even record the voices, so not everything has to be written, to really make it easier to collect the information. Any other feedback or questions? So with that, I would give the word to Karen Bernard from Unccd, working on gender. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Really quite fascinating to hear about the whole process of how the tool was developed and applied and rolled out in these various, well, tested in the 15 countries. So thank you so much for that presentation. I'm presenting today on behalf of Rakaya Ardara, who is our Gender Policy Officer at Unccd. I work with Rakaya on the gender team at Unccd. And so I'll be sharing with you a few thoughts about the gender responsive tools, data, and technologies in the context of implementation of the Unccd. So as you're aware, the key area that Unccd focuses on is land degradation. And here I have just a few key facts to share with you. 75% of land has already been degraded globally by human activities, and 1 in 5 hectares are no longer usable. So land degradation is ongoing and having severe and extensive impacts. 24% of greenhouse gas emissions are from agriculture, forestry, and other land uses. So there's a lot of overlap of the land degradation issues with climate change and the actions that the countries are taking on climate change within the context of the, not just the Unccd, but also the other Rio conventions. And then another key figure that we should consider is that land degradation affects the well-being of at least 3.2 billion people globally and costs more than 10% of the annual global GDP. So it has a significant impact on the global economy and on people's well-being in all regions of the world. Some countries to a greater extent, or some parts of some countries also to a greater extent. And the general context is that land degradation and drought reduce the availability of natural resources, which many people depend on, and many women globally. And natural resources such as fish, trees, timber being sold often as cash crops, mushrooms, honey, fuel wood, and medicinal plants. And one of the impacts of the land degradation and drought is that women must walk further distances to fetch valuable natural resources, such as to gather water for the family's use and also to fetch firewood for the cooking. Also part of the context is this concept of intersectionality, so that not all women are equally affected by land degradation and all of the impacts, that it depends also on the other aspects of and characteristics of the women and their communities, and whether these are women who are from a particular ethnic group or from more impoverished sectors of that society. And so women and other disadvantaged groups are more susceptible to climate shocks due to the lack of diversification of their assets, and also less access to resources to cope and recover from damage. So generally we can say that women are more substantially affected by land degradation, but not all women equally. And then finally, part of the context regards training and skills. We have the gender division of labor in agriculture, as Nicole had mentioned in her presentation, that often men are involved in certain types of agriculture, involving more mechanization, cash crops, export crops. Women tend to be more involved in home gardens, subsistence farming, and so on. And so the gender division of labor, as well as gender norms and perceptions, and that came across very clearly also in in Nicole's presentation of the SLM tool, can limit the access of women to the training necessary to respond to the effects of climate change and also to drought and irrigation issues. And also part of the context is the access to technologies. And so we've heard from Nicole about the direct and indirect gender-related barriers that limit the adoption of sustainable land management practices by women. We find land tenure insecurity, problems with availability of land, especially the quality of land available. Women are often not obtaining the most productive and fertile plots of land. Education and literacy also tends to impede access to technologies. Gender norms and roles, again, access to information, agricultural inputs, extension services, which, as Nicole had mentioned, extension services should be equally available to both women and men in every community, but there are a number of reasons why women have more challenges to access extension services. And also financing, of course, is fundamental in playing a role to the access that women can have to sustainable land management technologies. And as a result, and as has been shown in the project that WOCAT is leading on, is that the sustainable land management technologies are adopted typically more slowly by women and at a lower rate. So that's part of the inequalities that we're seeking to address with this entire project. Technology is, of course, not gender neutral, and I'm very glad to see that this project is really making that clear. Technology is not just available to everyone equally, but there are gender issues regarding access to technology and the ease of using particular technology and preferences as well. So the decisions by women to adopt or not specific technologies are influenced by production, cultural and social contexts, and of course by affordability, which brings us back to the issue of financing. Technology can reduce women's reliance on male labor or hired labor, and can also reduce their labor time. This is sort of a very key advance. If you can save women's time in terms of the hours spent doing certain types of work or household care or household tasks. And technology also has the potential to increase women's income and productivity. So we're looking at technology as a way to improve the status of women and the well-being of women through income and productivity. So the framework of the Unccd, it's the only legally binding framework as a convention set up to address specifically desertification and the effects of drought. At two COPs ago, not the last conference of parties, but the previous one, a gender action plan was adopted by the parties, by the countries which have signed on to the convention. And this gender action plan recognizes the need to accelerate efforts to increase women's meaningful participation in the implementation of the convention. So that was quite a significant moment for the Unccd to have the gender action plan adopted. And that gender action plan has 4 priorities for action. One is that women should participate in decisions taken during the design, planning, implementation, and evaluation of all initiatives to implement the convention. Secondly, that women should have enhanced access to improved knowledge and technologies. And the third area for action is integrating women's economic empowerment into the implementation of all the activities involving drought and desertification. In order to eradicate the extreme poverty of many women in many parts of the world, here we also see linkages to the Sustainable Development Goals through our Gender Action Plan priorities. And then the 4th priority is strengthening women's land rights and access to resources. This is quite fundamental. If we look at the figures of women's land ownership globally and by region, which Lorena will share with us, it was part of her the research undertaken in the study, we see tremendous inequalities in women's ownership of land, And so it's very fundamental to take action in that regard. And women's rights to own land. In some countries, the rights are very weak and very difficult to put into practice. So for the Gender Action Plan that the parties have approved, it's very important to have evidence-based information. So we have certain ideas, we have certain perceptions and assumptions, but we absolutely need to have the evidence and the data, which is fundamental to gender analysis in general, so that when we have research which is based on evidence, and again, we'll hear more about this in the presentation that Lorena will be making on the new study which was just completed. Then we can provide relevant information to the countries, to the parties, and to the stakeholders, which include a lot of the civil society organizations, other UN agencies, grassroots organizations. So that evidence is very valuable. And so part of this information and the evidence is related to this whole process of the gender responsive sustainable land management tool and the testing that was done and the kind of information that we found that Nicole has shared with us through that whole process of developing the tool, asking the questions, gathering the information, considering the differences that were found between men and women in many aspects. The study on the differentiated impacts of land degradation, drought, and desertification, which we'll hear more about, sheds light on key aspects which affect men and women differently as they are combating desertification and drought in their respective communities and countries. And also, Lorena has also gathered promising practices which can inspire us and which can show us creative solutions and coping mechanisms and ways forward. So these are promising practices that could be replicated or taken to scale, but I will not go into detail about those because we'll hear more about that shortly. Now, we have the Gender Action Plan approved by the parties, and we also have Unccd is convening with co-chairs a gender caucus, which has been a very effective mechanism to bring together all the stakeholders and the parties as well, to share knowledge and to advance conversations on, in the context of the implementation of the convention. At this conference of parties, we had 3 sessions focusing on different aspects of this work that we're all collaborating on in terms of advancing gender equality empowerment of women. We had the 3rd session this morning. The first one was a more high-level session with remarks and comments by an interministerial dialogue and hosted by the First Lady of the country and also the Minister of Women, Family and Children here in Côte d'Ivoire. So we were able to have 3 sessions at this conference of parties, so the Gender Caucus is gaining momentum. Previously we had 1 session, it was not quite as formalized. And finally, I wanted to share with you some of the recommendations that have been coming forward in these 3 sessions of the Gender Caucus. There have been some similarities between recommendations from different actors in different countries, party to the convention, and some of the civil society organizations and UN agencies. So we have here just a few of the main recommendations. There are actually several more, but these are ones that we wanted to highlight with you today. And one is to strengthen women's organizations' participation in the Unccd processes through the facilitation of their accreditation processes. So that's a very concrete recommendation, to bring more women's organizations to these meetings and to these discussions, because it was difficult to get many of them accredited. So we didn't have as many women's organizations here as we would have liked at this conference of parties. So that's one of the very specific recommendations. Also, to increase gender parity We have the Science Policy Interface, which is a technical commission of scientists that does a lot of work for the UNCCD. And we really need to have, we want to see more gender balance there. We want to see more women scientists. It's predominantly the male scientists. So that's quite important to bring in women's perspectives and women's experiences, because as we saw, that the technology and the science is not gender neutral. Another recommendation is to monitor women's participation in the UNCCD process and regularly share information within the Conference of Parties and the Gender Caucus. So we want to have specific indicators that we'll use to monitor the extent to which women are participating equally with men in these processes. And also share information and not wait every 2 years until the next COP to bring all our information. So we want a more ongoing information sharing platform. Another recommendation which came from the parties is to involve media and grassroots organizations in communications, knowledge, and awareness raising activities at the local and the national level. And we have heard in Nicole's presentation as well about the cultural norms and you know, the customs and how these are, there needs to be a lot of awareness about those and what can be done to more fully integrate women into, you know, all of these processes involving access to the technology for sustainable land management. So we need to definitely focus on awareness raising activities. And the media, of course, have a key role to play in that. They have a lot of networks and platforms to get messages out and to generate discussions. And the grassroots organizations have, of course, the experience on the ground. So they're seeing what the current awareness is and what the challenges are in that sense. Another recommendation is to strengthen the advisory role of the Gender Caucus in between the Conference of Parties through information sharing mechanisms that we can help to facilitate from the Secretariat. And we will definitely be following up with all of you and the participants that have been engaging with us in the Gender Caucus to have more ongoing information sharing. So we'll have a mailing list, and we will have, and the mailing list will include the countries, the parties, civil society organizations, and also observers. So we'll be happy to be in contact with you in between the next COP meetings. Another recommendation is to involve members of the Gender Caucus in strategic activities led by the Secretariat and the global mechanism relating to gender. So we need to mobilize more of those of you who have the expertise and the experience to contribute to strategic activities and to shaping the messages and shaping the strategies. The global mechanism within the UNCCD actually does quite a lot of interesting work on gender. For example, they were working closely with the various countries to improve their national drought plans, and they're able to be very effective in getting gender mainstream into the national drought plans. So the global mechanism is important within this whole process as well. And just a couple more recommendations that I'll mention. One is to continue advocating for women's land rights, including inheritance rights everywhere, and ensuring linkages with national legislations. As I said, land rights is quite fundamental, and Lorena had found in her study to generate the evidence that there are ways of doing this that have worked well in different countries. So it's a difficult challenge, but it's quite one of the most significant things that we can work on together. The last recommendation that I wanted to share with you was to develop and disseminate gender-related knowledge on the 4 priorities for action. So we have a lot more to do in terms of gathering the data, analyzing the data, sharing the knowledge, and so on. So the research program will be continuing. I think that with the study that Lorena has undertaken, we're just starting to open up a lot of the, and looking at a lot of the data, but a lot more needs to be done, and we need to drill down a lot more into the data. So, so these are some of the recommendations that, again, will, before the end of the COP, we'll be putting those forward, and there will be actually decisions and discussions taken during the official proceedings. So I think that was the last slide. Let's see. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for this nice presentation. And actually now we would like, if there are just questions right now, we could quickly open the floor, but maybe if they are addressed through the presentation right now, we can postpone them slightly. So I would like actually to go back to the panelists where we just had some first insights before. And can I please ask Natalie, sorry, to go over there as well? That makes life of the people with the camera easier as well. And so we have the panelists all together. And that helps a bit to focus a bit more on it.
Pate, would you mind to also come to sit here, because apparently they are filming, so you can sit, you can stand. It's just for the camera, because apparently they are filming, so it's being broadcasted, so that it's easier for them. Great.
So thank you very much. That means we have our panelists now all together over there. So just for the audience in such a room, it's quite difficult to position the panel at the right place. But yes, please, again, welcome. We have heard about that. We have heard of them. We got the first statement already before. So Amate Pate, he is the lead environment and climate for West Central Africa at IFAD. Then just next to him, we have Natalie van Harn, works as a senior policy officer at both ends in the Netherlands. And so Natalie has taken up different roles with the Unccd, and she's very experienced to represent the CSO at the Unccd. As an example, she was CSO observer to the Unccd Science Policy Interface from 2014 until 2017, as far as I know. Next, Stephanie Schacke, so she's research team leader, finance and investment for climate action in the Alliance of Biodiversity International and the International Center for Tropical Agriculture, CIAT. Welcome. Finally, we have Lorena Aguilar, and so she's previous Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of Costa Rica, and also the author of the Unccd report on gender and land, if I'm right. Thank you very much to all of you for coming. And I think it would be nice to get just the first feedback from all of you. And if we can we maybe start with you, Lorena, and you just can use the microphone you have in front of you.
Perfect, thank you. And sorry, because these lights are giving me a migraine that I'm about to die of the pain that I have. No, I think that we have to remember that in the last decade, we have been making progress in trying to generate gender disaggregated statistics, but that is not true for the environmental sector. It's one of the sectors in which this type of information is not there. So I think that the tool, the SLM efforts that you're doing, first to have these data disaggregated by sex is the first step in a very important process. The responsiveness will come later, because I mean, what are you doing with this process is that you are visibilizing the gender gaps and understanding them. But we need to understand, what do we mean by gender responsive? I mean, gender responsive, according to what the parties have agreed on various of the conventions, is the act of closing those gender gaps. And what are the actions that are going to be done to close those gender gaps? And I'll give you an example. A similar process had been conducted, and I'm going to talk about Costa Rica, on these gender analysis when it comes to finance, when it comes to credit, when it comes to technology. But the office that deals with payment for environmental services, which had collected this information, found out that women were not benefiting. I mean, they identified a major gap because of land tenure. If you don't own the land, you don't get the payment for environmental services because they had been linked. So what they did, it's something quite interesting. I mean, recognizing all this data that they have collected, developed what it's called a GIGUP. It's an award for units, productive units, that are going to overcome those gender gaps. So for example, if land tenure is an issue, that unit need to prove that they're going to inherit the land in equal conditions to the boys and the girls within the household. If you get, and they have 21 different criteria based on that gender analysis that they transform them into impacts on those gender gaps in such a way that if you get an 85, you're going to get the benefit of the payment for environmental services. So they have delinked it to land tenure. But there are elements of land tenure in this award. So what I'm trying to say that it is fundamental, the data. It is fundamental, this gender analysis. But the end is to come up with innovative ways, with policies and innovative ways, if you want to call it responsive, that it has the impact in reducing the gender gaps.
Thank you very much. Really good to understand, so to ask the question, so what do we mean by gender responsiveness? Thanks a lot for that. And I would like to just hand over to our next panelist, maybe Amat Bate, may I give you the word? Some reflections.
Good morning and thanks for the invitation. So it looks like I'm the only man in this panel, so I don't know if we can say it's gender unbalanced, but I'm quite happy to be here because I believe, you know, change, when we are talking about gender issues, particularly in rural area, it can not be done only with women, but with men. When men champions the gender issues, I think the problem is solved because they are the problem. So at the end of the day, that's something we need to tackle. But let me just come on a more serious note. So in IFAD, we work with smallholder farmers, rural farmers, and women are the backbone of rural economies. So for instance, in Africa, 80% of the work that is being done in the farms, in all segments of the value chain, you find women there. So they were the one feeding us. They were the one contributing to this 1/3 of the world food being produced to feed cities and other part of the world. But unfortunately, they're not getting a lot of it, any shares, or if there are shares, unfortunately, it's not getting to them. They are the one also impacted by climate change, the most vulnerable one, knowing that most of our work in rural areas, it is rain-fed, not really modern. The lot of work which they are spending to collect wood, to prepare and take care of the family, and non-paid care work, which is another part of their work, is extremely something that talk to us. So in IFAD, we have policies. So most of our policies to make sure that the women, rural women, are at the center of our action. So how do we do it? Number one is to assess the root cause of this discrimination, exclusion, and not including women in the decision planning process. In many countries, most of our assessment show clearly that it's social norm, it's cultural norms, sometimes that are not necessarily well-founded, but it's just like the way it is. And the way it is sometimes is not always the way it should be. And we take action through our programs to make sure that whenever we are in a rural area, we set some quota to make sure our investment goes to those rural women. By doing what those, in the last 3 years, we set 25% of our investment need to go there. So we write it on a funding proposal, we put the budget, and we ensure that that budget and those activities with the gender action plan is integrated, so we ensure most of these actions and activities are going to the woman. Number 2 is also whenever we are working on our investment and trying to get women in this process. So there is a lot of issues related to capacity building. So rural finance projects are there, they are not aware. Financial literacy, they are not in. Gender mainstreaming into and presence into those platforms, they are not there. So most of those different entry points, we try to ensure that their activities, training modules, financial literacy modules, and if they are do not have access to banking system, work through digital platforms, so at least when the resources get to those women, it is not also controlled by the men. And to end, where we have issues also in rural agri program is access to assets. The assets, it's land, it's water, it's natural resources, which is extremely key. And even if there is an agreement at the household level and you put investment tomorrow, someone can come and take it because just you don't have a title, you don't have the rights, and unfortunately such kind of risk prevent investors and private investors to invest on women. So at the end, the response is also to make sure that they have access to title, if not a leasing mechanism or some document that are written by the community sign so they can exploit it for 5-6 years if it is a cooperative of women. So to just ensure that the risk is managed. If there is no guarantee also, the different resources we are providing with grants and so on, those resources are put in place to ensure that these women, when they go, they can get that one. The final point is now everything related to participation. So many fora, you have participation that is an issue. So their participation start by steering committee of the project. So we try to ensure that in our project, there will be representative in the project itself, a gender specialist, and in many cases, try to get a woman who will be in the project and trying to advocate, but also implement all activities that have been identified. So in a more concrete manner, this is how we operate in our project to ensure that our programs are gender responsive and women are tackled through the different programs, and most of the bottlenecks are removed so they can be part of the rural development process. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these nice words and to give us some insights on how you are steering actually investments and resources, but also the assets and participation in your program to ensure that actually your programs are gender responsive. And I think we all fully agree that gender issues can not only be solved by women themselves, and therefore I think it's also nice to have, even in this room, also a quite gender balanced interest audience. And now I would like just to give the word just next to you to Natalie.
Thank you very much. I first would like to talk a little bit about both ends and how we work, as it helps to understand our interest in the gender responsive SLM tool that was developed by WOCAT and Unccd. Both Ends is a 35-people organization based in Utrecht in the Netherlands, and together with environmental justice organizations from the Global South, Both Ends works towards a sustainable, fair and inclusive world. Our two main interventions are the following. Together, we gather and share information about policy and investments that have a direct impact on people and their livelihoods, and we engage in joint advocacy. You might have seen us advocating for land tenure rights and the recognition of agroecology here at COPS with the DryNet CSO network that we co-established in 2007, specifically for this goal. Our other intervention, main intervention, is that both ends and our civil society partners promote and support sustainable community-based initiatives, such as farmer-managed natural regeneration, ZAI, and log forestry, permaculture, non-timber forest products, networks, etc. Both ends works with more than 200 environmental justice organizations all around the world, and both ends is therefore in a very fortunate position to connect groups and build strategic networks. I would like to give two examples that are interesting to mention in the context of the gender-responsive SLM tool. The first example is our 10-year program, which is called Communities Regreen the Sahel. Within this program, both ends and partner organizations in Niger, Senegal, and Burkina Faso want to create all the necessary conditions to replicate and upscale farmer-managed natural regeneration. We are supporting communities to use soil and water conservation techniques that allow people to better manage their land while improving agricultural yields. These generative techniques are combined with farmer-to-farmer knowledge exchange, such as farmer field schools, exchange visits, and radio programs. And we combine it with land use planning agreements through close cooperation between farmers, pastoralists, and local authorities. Within this program, the village committees form the backbone of farmer-managed natural regeneration practices. These committees decide which areas are going to be regreened and what crops and products are going to be promoted. We support women who want to take up roles in these village committees, so in the decision bodies. The second example is the Gaga Alliance that we are a member of. Gaga stands for the Global Alliance for Green and Gender Action, and it unites the collective power of gender, climate, and environmental justice movements around the world. In 2021, Gaga's network consisted of 16 women's funds, 8 environmental justice funds, 28 NGOs, and 390 grassroots groups in 39 countries. Gaga provides local women-led groups with small grants and non-financial support, such as capacity development through thematic workshops and access to information. Gaga supports groups to lead advocacy work at the local, national, and regional levels linked to women's rights and climate change. And Gaga facilitates and participates in linking and learning between women's rights and climate justice groups and movements to build knowledge, share strategies, and collectively influence decision makers. Within Gaga, we are now documenting gender-just climate solutions. We want to document these and show them to policymakers in order to mobilize political, policy, and financial support for these initiatives. Gender-just climate solutions are socially and ecological sound approaches in which women and local communities are key actors, both in design and implementation. They are built on local and ancestral knowledge, while also incorporating appropriate new and innovative methods and technologies. They foster gender equality, amplifies women's resilience, center women's leadership, and are inclusive and sustainable. Gender-just climate solutions represent effective community-based responses to climate change impacts while restoring soils and fostering biodiversity. And Gaga and both ends want the world to see these. To conclude, from the perspective of the work that both ends is doing with environmental justice groups and networks, we would like to congratulate WOCAT and Unccd with the gender-responsive SLM tool. And we are very interested to see the next steps on how the tool will be concretely used by local authorities, national planners, and specifically by local communities with the support of CSOs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalie, for these nice words, and also to share your experience you made in communities on regreening the Sahel and your Gaga project, where you have developed a gender-just climate solution. And I think there's really great potential also to work together. Finally, I would like to give actually not only the floor, but also the screen to Stephanie, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tatenda, and I think it reflects well on some of the points that have been mentioned by the other panelists. So, next. So, I'm not going to repeat that part, but this is an example from Senegal where we know that the main climate hazards are increasing temperature, rainfall variability, and increased drought. And as well, it was mentioned by my colleague, the women are the most affected by the effects of climate change. We in this project, which is the Accelerating Impacts of CGIAR Climate Research for Africa, talk about climate smart agriculture, but SLM, as we know, is also part of that. So looking at SLM practice, climate smart agriculture, and the integration of climate information service, we are looking at how it can play a key role into maintaining healthy and productive soil, as well as adapting to climate change. Next. And in that context, the context of Senegal, we have looked at investment, and I'm very happy to have had the few words from Aoife just before, because it's exactly following on that. Investment and finance are a key aspect of this topic, and even though the sector can be lively, often in the agricultural sector, it can be very timid. And most of the agribusiness taking place in Senegal, for example, are at the transformation stage of the value chain or are about advisory service. The integration of climate smart practice is often not embedded in investment, and but however, there is some example where we have information that is integrated into insurance schemes. And this type of climate information services are available and do help to adapt to changing weather, but are not always done. So let's look at the next slide, which is about why we should focus on investment by women-led businesses. So women have restricted access to land and land title, as mentioned many times. And it's a constraint to get commercial loans and access to microfinance institutions, as was mentioned by my co-panelists. Women-led SMEs are often informal, and therefore, because of their way of working, it's very difficult for them to access to facilities. Also, as it was mentioned by one of the panelists, the household roles are a constraint because they have not only to take care of their households, but also to work in the farm, and often they have a shortage of time to engage in business activity. Women also have less capacity, less access to capacity building and financial education. I'm very much repeating what was been saying before, so we have the context. And women producers are organized in association and usually invest in small-scale transformation for value added. So now, how does all of that come together, and what can we do to improve access for women to businesses and therefore to finance? Next. So there we talk about sustainable finance. So sustainable finance is defined as investment, you can see it in bold, as investment decisions that take into account the environmental, social, and governance factors of an economic activity or projects. So as we know, investors look for potential financial return. And gender-smart investing approach use capital to intentionally and measurably address gender disparities and better inform investment decision. Now, in the context of climate change and the climate impacts that we have just mentioned before, and also importance of having healthy soil and healthy agriculture production, we are looking at applying gender-smart approach within investment decision-making, which can ensure women having access to resource and information and practice to adapt to climate change and improve the productivity gap. And that's where gender-responsive adaptation practice are key. Next. So in this project is in 6 countries, but in the part of the project that we are implementing in Senegal, we are looking at building an accelerator for women-led agribusiness. It will be a 6-month program that is starting in June, where the first step is to look at the sector. What is happening in Senegal? What kind of agribusiness do we have? What are the ones led by a woman? We know a lot of transformation is led by women, but what is existing? There we're going to set up a contest. This contest has several criteria. Criteria is it should be a woman-led or a woman strongly involved agribusiness. The second criteria it is that there should be a willingness to invest in adaptation practice, climate-smart adaptation practice, which can also help to improve productivity but adapt to the future challenge of climate change. Another criteria is that they need to be, they can be very small and beginning agribusiness, but they need to have a financial plan and a business plan that we can look at. Once the three selected businesses will be selected, and these 3 businesses will go through 2 programs. The first program is a technical assistance, which is about supporting them into adopting practices that are supporting productivity, improving soil, etc., and adapting to climate change. And the second technical assistance is about building a financial plan and a business model that is sustainable by providing them access to finance and to financial education, as it is, as we heard before, one of the big constraints for women in agriculture. And the overall goal, next slide. Oh, this is the selection criteria. I just talked about them. And the overall goal is that these 3 selected women-led agribusiness are able to integrate adaptation practice to address the impact of climate change, as well as scale their business by raising capital. Another goal is to bring awareness on the importance of uptake of climate-smart practice and to spread it widely across the region. We are working mostly in the dry land of Senegal, but it can be broader than that. So that is a project that we are putting in place now. We are basing it on another example that has been done in Zambia that is currently ongoing. The point in Senegal is that it's a gender-focused project, which is a big difference with the one in Zambia, but I'm happy to talk more about it later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. And we are very much looking forward also then to learn more about how you implemented actually this project for women-led agribusinesses. And now for the final discussion, I would like to hand over again to my a bit more competent colleague, Nicole, who is sitting next to me. Thanks.
Thank you, Tatenda. So is there questions from the audience to the panelists?
Just a question about the capital. What is the amount of the capital that you can support with?
So in the program, there will be a capital to de-risk first the selected agribusiness. And we are looking at about 20,000 to be defined with the technical assistance to support these women in starting or in building their business plan. $20,000.
For each woman?
For each agribusiness.
Ah, good. Thank you. We hope you have a project in Lebanon.
We'll think about it.
Any other questions or comments from the audience? We are all hungry. We didn't have lunch. So it's already 3 o'clock. I mean, we are still here. The panelists are still here. Thank you very much for attending. There are some flyers here if you like, also for some of the material. You are welcome to get it. And otherwise, I don't know, Karen, for those you mentioned an email list, for those who would like to stay in touch on the gender topic, can they subscribe somewhere? Shall they leave their details with you?
Yes, I don't know if we have a list of the participants in this session, because we could integrate that into our overall mailing list. I know that some of you here, for example, Fida and Dunia, are on our list already, but we could perhaps, I can ask people to sign up here with your name, organization, and email address, and then we can add you to the list as well.
Great. So for those of you who would like to stay in touch on the gender topic with the Unccd Secretariat, please leave your business card or your name on the sheet of paper. And with that, I'm happy that you were all here. Thank you very much for participating, and have a good lunch or rest of the afternoon. Thank you very much.
Ah oui. Oh, okay, and you can leave me her. Oh, thank you. Okay, so just to check, Wickrama Rack.
C-H-C-H-I.
Okay.
Shall I write it again?
Ah, okay. And here the last letters are T-E-S-I? Okay.
It is not clear, I believe.
Allô, test.